So I'm over here at the sink and I'm going to talk a little bit about patinas. So normally when I do this, I have this piece of brass tube and it's got pretty crazy colors all over it. There's greens, there's blues, there's browns. It's this really nice speckly variegated color. And typically what I do is I pass this around while I'm talking about patinas, and I talk about what a patina is. So a patina is a chemical coloring that's on the surface of the metal. It's usually a very thin chemical coloring, and it's caused by a chemical reaction between whatever you're using for your patina and the properties of the metal itself. So different metals are going to react differently to patinas. Some metals like copper and brass and bronze patina very well. Other metals like nickel or silver don't have quite as many options for patinas. A brief history behind patinas. So we know that people were putting patinas on metal pretty much as soon as they started working with metal. When they dig up ancient Chinese bronzes and things like that, they find traces of arsenic and other things that we know that they used to make patinas. We find traces of those chemicals and stuff in the dirt around where a lot of these artifacts are found. You know, 2,000 or more year-old artifacts. And so one of the groups of people that get a lot of credit for patinas were the Europeans during the Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth. And so the Europeans were literally tripping over these ancient Greek and Roman bronzes, and they found that the ones that were downstream from their lavatories had more intense colors on them. So one of the things that artists would do during the Renaissance is they'd finish an object, it would look like this. They would go dig a big hole in their backyard, essentially, bury that object in that hole in their backyard, and then they'd go tell everybody to do their business in that hole for a while, and then after a couple of weeks, a month, half a year, they'd dig that thing up and it would look like this. And so now we know that this coloration that's on here is the reactions of a combination of certain salts. We have certain ammonias. We have uric acid. Typically, while I'm giving this history, this piece of metal has made it the whole way around the class and everybody's handled it. And then I say, you know, I try to get everybody to acknowledge that I said uric acid. And then I ask them, where does uric acid come from? Uric acid comes from urine, right? And so urine has ammonia, salt, uric acid, and some other things. So this particular piece of metal was done in a collaboration between me and my cat. And so basically, if you take a piece of metal and throw it into used cat litter, and leave it there for a couple of days, a weekend, a week, whatever, you're gonna get this variegated color. Now, some things to be said about this particular patina. This particular patina has a visual texture to it. That's what makes it interesting. It's not just one single tone across the whole piece of metal. And so, because I put this in used kitty litter, the cat litter is mixed with, the cat urine is mixed with clay and whatever other chemicals they have in there to try to make it not smell as bad and things like that. So that's going to hold all of these different chemicals. It's going to deposit them in different concentrations throughout this piece of metal. So the general rule is you do not want to have a patina with a strong visual texture on a piece of metal that has a lot of surface texture. If you watch the texturing video, you see me hammer texturing and things like that. You would not want to put this patina on that type of metal because the two are going to fight for attention. You know, we're either not going to see the nice texture that this has, or we're not gonna see the nice texture that you put in your metal. So typically, for this patina, you're gonna wanna do this on a smooth piece of metal. Now, you might be one of these weird people that doesn't wanna handle cat litter. I don't know why you wouldn't wanna be playing with cat urine. You can get a similar effect by just using ammonia and salt. And I'm gonna show you how to apply that here right now. The first thing is to make sure that your piece of metal doesn't have any grease on it. If you have grease, if you've been handling this piece of metal a lot, the oils from your hands are going to not allow the water to adhere the salt. So what I do is, see how that water kind of beads up and pools up? So just like for enameling, we have a little bit of pumice and a little bit of baking soda. And then I'm going to clean this with a Scotch-Brite pad. I could put a couple drops of dish soap on here too, if I wanted to, but it's not that necessary. Okay, so now that water just sheens evenly across that surface. That lets me know that I have removed all the oils. The next thing that I'm going to do is I need to get the salt to adhere to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run some more water on it just to get it wet. And this is just literally table salt. And I'm going to sprinkle that salt on. And what you will see, maybe you can see this, is the salt is deposited in different concentrations. It's really heavy right here in the middle, and then it's fairly light over here. Now, I typically am not a fan of using regular old table salt because the grains, the particles are a very uniform size. I prefer the irregularities of different size, so I tend to go for more of a natural like rock salt, and sometimes crush it up with a mortar or pestle to make it irregular. Next, I'm going to get a cup, any random cup. What I want to make sure is that my piece of metal can sit on the top of that cup. Or if you have something like this, you can lay a couple pieces of wire over it and essentially balance your metal over that. Because what we want to do is we want to suspend our metal over the ammonia so that the fumes of the ammonia are going to react with the salt. We don't want it submerged in ammonia. We really don't need that much. And so now that I have some ammonia in my cup, I'm going to set it somewhere out of the way. And so somewhere over here, I need some way to trap the ammonia fumes. So I'm going to take my metal with some salt, and I'm going to set that over top. And so for this one, I'm just going to take this glass beaker. You want to use something that doesn't get used often. I don't want to commandeer our water pitcher for this task because other people might be using this. This particular beaker does not get a lot of use. And then that's just going to trap those ammonia fumes, and it's going to cause the salt to react with the ammonia. Typical of what your object is going to look like when we take it out of the ammonia. It's going to be wet, however, and so this particular piece has been allowed to dry. That step is really important because what we need to do next is we need to wash, very carefully and gently wash the salt off. We don't want to leave the salt on there. If we don't wait till this dries. It hasn't set the color onto the metal just yet. So we really need to allow this piece of metal to dry. Okay, I can gently, very, very gently use a toothbrush. I don't want to be too aggressive because I don't want to scrub my color away. So you'll notice some differences in the color pretty quickly. There's going to be some spots, some different blues and reds and browns and blacks. And this is one of those things where you really want to experiment with it. You know, your patina is going to be one of the first things that people notice on your piece of metal. And so if you're not happy with it, take it off. It comes off really easily. And so patinas are very fragile. They're very fugitive. This is typically one of the absolute last things that you're going to do on your piece of metal because it can be scratched. It doesn't withstand heat. So if you're going to try to do anything with heat, it'll just burn right off. And so you want to make sure that pretty much all of your finishing is done before you start applying patinas. And then if you're not happy with them, they're super easy to just sand off or even burn off and put it in the pickle and then, you know, try it again. Now, I'm gonna let this dry and it's gonna get kind of chalky looking, and then I'll put some wax on it to protect it. Now that my metal has dried, I need to seal it. I need to protect it. If you don't protect your patina, it will fade over time. And so what I want to do is I'm going to use some of this Johnson's paste wax. This is my preference on wax. There's a bunch of different types of wax that you can use. The Johnson's paste wax has a little bit of a brownish tint to it. But basically we keep this brush in here because if we took the brush out, it would dry out. And so we're just going to paint this on. And you see how it really takes that chalkiness away and allows me to see this color. Now I'm going to let this dry probably about 15 to 20 minutes is what it takes to dry. It'll get really cloudy, and then once it's dry you're going to use nylon pantyhose material to buff it to a shine. The next patina that I'm going to talk about is liver of sulfur. Liver of sulfur is a darkening agent. And basically the way the liver of sulfur works is we have these little cans of liver of sulfur, and actually this can stays in my office. What I typically do is I will put a small supply of liver of sulfur into these little containers. Because if we allow any moisture to get into this can, the whole can is kaput. And so I would rather contaminate a small amount in one of these containers than the whole can itself. So what we need to do is we need to start by thoroughly cleaning our liver of sulfur container and then filling it with extremely hot water. You want the water to be very hot but not boiling. And so if it's boiling, it's going to be too hot and it's going to break down the liver of sulfur. So typically what I'll do is for a container of this size, I'll fill it up with as hot as the tap water will go. And then before I add any chemicals or anything, I'll put it in the microwave for about 2 minutes. After it comes out of the microwave, I need to use a very small piece of liver of sulfur for this quantity. Typically, I would use a piece about that big. You don't want a very concentrated solution because you want to deposit that color slowly. You want to build it up nice and slow. If it builds up too quickly, it can flake off. So this is my sun that I made in the texturing and roller printing demonstration. We're slowly starting to build up color. And now I'm just going to dry it off. When you're using the liver of sulfur, you may notice some really pretty rainbowy colors and things like that. Appreciate them at that moment, because chances are it'll fade to gray. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit of steel wool and take the color off, because right now we can't really see all that much compared to the two. And so what we need to do is, with a fine steel wool, we need to start removing that patina. And what happens is, if you have a textured piece of metal like this, and I remove the patina with steel wool, it's going to remove the patina from the high parts, but the patina will stay in the lower parts. And basically when it stays in the lower parts, it creates a contrast. And so you get a lot of depth in your texture. And then I could decide to wax this, or I don't have to. It's kind of my choice. It's not going to affect the patina that much if this is allowed to get dark. To dispose, the liver of sulfur is pretty stinky. It smells like sulfur, it smells like rotten eggs. Now, when it's this brownish yellow color, it's still good, it's still viable. Anyone can use it. But once it fades to a dull gray, it's no longer active, you can't really use it anymore. This is one of the few chemicals that we use that is safe to dump down the sink. And then I'm just going to rinse out the container. I didn't mention earlier, but it is really important to only use the containers that have been marked for liver of sulfur. Once we use a container for liver of sulfur, it's kind of contaminated. We definitely wouldn't want to drink out of this. And so don't keep grabbing new containers for liver of sulfur. If your piece doesn't fit in this container, you can use a paintbrush and you can paint the liver of sulfur onto your metal. It takes longer to apply it that way, but it works just fine.